105. Welcome. And I'm also reposting where the class materials can be found if you didn't know that already. I am going to share my screen, just a sec. And so this is where the class materials are found, also where you registered. And just wanted to point out, if you didn't notice it, there's a copy of the presentations, a PDF of the slides, and then each of the labs and this extra file, which we'll talk about for the second class. Going back to the presentation, I'll introduce myself. My name is Paul Litwin. I am staff at CSDE at UW, and I have a background in biostatistics, and a real focus the last many years has been data collection, data acquisition, data and data analysis. And I have been using REDCap for a long time, probably in excess of 15 years. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So hi, everybody. My name is Matt Dunbar. I am a research scientist at the Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology. I've been working here since 2008, so for about 15 years. My background is actually geography, so I do a lot of spatial data, GIS, map making, et cetera. But I also lead our science core at CSDE, and one of the things that we kind of specialize in is data collection, data analysis, and Paul Litwin and I have been working together on the Dog Aging Project, a large study of aging and companion animals, for about 6 or 7 years, and that's how I got to know Paul. He is the kind of our IT director and leads our entire data collection infrastructure. So managing a REDCap instance that tracks 50,000 study participants and their data, annual follow-ups, et cetera, has been a really fun project. So Paul's helping out by being able to give these workshops here at CSDE. And as a scientific support organization, we love being able to support grad students and faculty and staff at the UW and the research that you're conducting. So this is a great opportunity to talk about collecting your own data, running a research data project using REDCap. We hope this is really interactive here today. And if you have any questions, just feel free to chat or even raise your hand. We want to make sure we stop and get all of your questions addressed as quickly as we can. Cool. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Matt. Okay. So our agenda is going to be split into 2 parts. Part 1 is today, why use REDCap? What's the motivation? Then we'll do a quick getting started information about REDCap, what it is, and take a quick tour of the user interface of REDCap. Then we will get into actually doing some work, which starts with creating a REDCap project and a lab following that, creating a data instrument, followed by a lab, and creating some reports and exporting data, followed by a lab. And then a week from today, we will switch to talking about something called surveys. You notice here we called it a data instrument, which is collecting data from with logged in users, but surveys are participants who are not logged in. And so we'll talk about the distinction there, and then we'll do a lab on creating a survey. And then we'll talk about, so this first section on surveys is talking about one-time surveys, sort of one and done. But then we'll talk about follow-up surveys where you want to continually survey individuals over a time period. And then we'll talk about importing data into REDCap. So your data, you have some data that exists either before your study or project, or you acquire data through some other way, such as with an instrument, or someone gives you some data and you want to merge it into your REDCap project. How do you do that? And followed by a lab. And then we'll basically, REDCap is such a huge product. has so many features, and we'll touch on some of the other features that you might run across, including this idea of development versus production, and then all the other features. And even then, we won't touch on all features because there's just so many. But we will, throughout the class, entertain questions about some of those other features if you have those. So just to start, what is REDCap? The name is an sort of a extension of an acronym which stands for Research Electronic Data Capture. That's because REDCap is fundamentally a tool called an electronic data capture system, sometimes referred to as EDC. It's just a way to pull in data electronically on a computer. EDC systems are used to capture data, and you might also refer to them as a database, but a database itself is essentially a repository for data. It doesn't necessarily say how that data goes in, and the REDCap adds all of these features to make it easy to acquire data, either by entering it, importing it, or having survey participants directly give you that data. There are other tools called survey systems like SurveyMonkey and others that really aren't EDCs. They are more geared towards one-time surveys. And REDCap also includes features that make it unnecessary to use something like SurveyMonkey because it basically has all the features of SurveyMonkey and lots more. REDCap came originally from National Institutes of Health funding, and it was developed a little over 20 years ago at Vanderbilt University. And it's an interesting product in that it is free for any university or nonprofit to use. In other words, we don't pay to get access to the source code and the executables to run REDCap. It's all free, but you have to be a university or a nonprofit. It is not available to for-profit institutions. And it's maintained by this group at Vanderbilt University. And in order to host it, you actually have at University of Washington, we had to join the REDCap consortium, of which I'm an active member. And there's a conference every year, and there's different things to help, and where the consortium members actually contribute back to REDCap and make it stronger, and are beta testers and work with it to add features and such and extensions. REDCap is amazingly pervasive throughout the world. There's over 7,500 partner sites. That counts multiple sites. So the University of Washington, for example, I think has probably 5 or 6 different groups who host REDCap, including one really large one hosted by a group called ITHS, which you might have run across. Our instance right here at CSDE is much smaller. That is, we have less users, and we have it's more focused on the goals of CSDE rather than offering hosting for everyone, which ITHS does. But 7,500 different server groups with servers. And you might think it's a cloud product, but it isn't a cloud product. Every different institution has their own hosting of it. Now it can be hosted in the cloud, but there's no when we set it up, we're not sharing the same instance with Vanderbilt and the university and Cornell or in Columbia and everything. We all have our own instance that we manage and maintain separately and customize separately. Has over 3.5 million users, and over 2 million projects have been created. A project is the basic unit, which you'll learn about in a minute, of for a research study or usage. And it's constantly being upgraded. They actually release small feature and bug fixes once a week, and release larger feature releases usually once every month or two. So if you're going to spend time to learn a product and put put a lot of time into it, you want to know that it's a product that is being actively updated and maintained, and REDCap definitely is in that. It's also designed to be worked for nonprofit use and for primarily for medical research, although some other things. We're going to start with, do we have any questions before we move ahead? And if you're shy about speaking up, you can throw them into the chat too. Okay, since there is none, we're going to continue. Quick tour. So I'm going to switch to REDCap. So this is the CSDE instance, which stands for, by the way, Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology. And this is my my projects, and that's so if you once you log in, you'll go to this homepage first. This homepage just has a lot of info about REDCap and the hosting institution, which in this case is CSDE. You can read that at your leisure. And also, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll note the version. You can know exactly what version of REDCap you are on. Because if you switch between different REDCap institutions, or what they call instances, they might be on a different version. If you're depending on a specific feature that was only introduced recently, you want to make sure that that is also being utilized in that. If you're planning to like move your REDCap project to another instance, it's good to know that. So then you would then go from the home page to the My Projects page. This lists all the projects that I have access to, and it allows you to organize them using this Organize button. We're not going to really show you how to do that. It's pretty self-evident, but I have two little bins to put my projects on here. Since I'm an administrator for this instance of REDCap, I can actually get access to any project, but these are the ones that I have been added to as a user. And I have a bunch of ones that I play with for this class to give you an idea of different things. Let's see what the slides say next. That's my projects. And there's a few things that my projects tell me that are interesting besides the name, and I click on, then I will open that project. But besides the name, it'll show me the number of records in that project, the number of fields in that project, the number and types of instruments, and the status of that project, which we'll talk about, and this type we'll talk about eventually. Okay, so when I get into a project, so I'll click on one of these projects, books, there is a sort of main area which is going to change depending on what I'm doing. And then there's this nav bar on the left side, which will be mostly fixed, with some exceptions, but most of the time what I call navigation bar or nav bar will always be there. And in this slide here, I was trying to give you a sense for what that what the different parts are. So the top part here is sort of your general area where you can get back to the parent the parent pages, which are more generic outside of your project, like my projects. If you're an administrator, you can get to this thing called Control Center, but normally you guys wouldn't have access to that. And these are some administrator things, again, because I'm an administrator. But this next section under here is about other pages within the project for doing design, for setting up the project. So that includes project setup, the online designer, the data dictionary, and the codebook. And it tells me what status my project is in, which is in the development status. The other major one is production, which we'll learn about in the second week. The second sort of section here is for data collection. This record status dashboard shows me all collected data so far in this project. These are the records going down the page. And if I had more than one instrument, they would go, or form, they would go across the page. And there's also another screen that's I can add new records from here, but there's another thing called add edit records, which allows me to select existing records. It's an alternate way than the dashboard, and also search for records by different fields in there so that I can search by a specific field to look for that and typing a letter, and then I would find, oh yeah, that maybe I want it will do a partial search on that and then lets me jump to that record. But I can also do the same thing by going in here and jumping from there. So there's alternative ways to do that. So this section is all about data collection. And then this section called applications is about all the other things you can do besides collecting data, which I won't touch on all of them, but includes reports and exporting that data, importing data, looking at the audit trail or log, and a number of other things. And then this section below that lists any reports you've created. So you can create reports here, or you can actually go in here, and it will actually enumerate all the reports. You can also collapse that section if you don't want to see that. Same thing with the applications. So, and then if you use anything called an external module, which are ways to do basically plugins or add-ins to REDCap that enhance the functionality, then they would be listed there. But you probably won't deal with that for the most part. And then finally, there's the help and information. There's an FAQ and a help system that if I click on, will open up in another window. So I'm not showing you that. And the video tutorials will show you some various tutorials that you can take on your own time to give you features. I do warn you that some of these are kind of old, but they were. I know Vanderbilt was in the process of trying to update these. There's some of them were like 10 years old, or 6 or 7 years old, and a few other things. Okay, so that is this basic thing. And as I mentioned, the nav bar you see when you get a chance to open REDCap might vary depending on your security access and what items you already have in the project. There's another important page is the product setup page. We go into back to here, and that's this, click right there, project setup. Project home, by the way, is not very useful. I don't spend any time on it because it has very little information. It's kind of an old page that is not that useful. It will tell you who all the users are and a few other project statistics, but that's all. A project setup allows you to access all of the features to configure and design your project. So the biggest, probably most commonly used part would be the online designer, where here you can go and design the questions that are going to be asked for your particular instrument. And we'll talk about that in a bit. That is really probably the most common button you'll be using. In fact, it's so common, it's available from Project Setup, but it's also available directly from the nav bar. There's another thing called the data dictionary, which you can basically take and download into a file of the format called CSV, which can be opened up in Excel and other editors, that lets you basically lay out or modify the design of your project from a file and then import that back in and change it. There are other things you can do in here to modify the features that are used in your project. For example, I can enable the use of surveys in the project. I can decide that I want to allow my project to collect data over time, and that's where you enable what's called longitudinal data collection. And there's other little features, like there's a mobile app you can enable There's a randomization module and other things that you can set up in here. And finally, at the bottom, you can move your project into production, which we will talk about in the second module of this class, what that means. The record status dashboard is an overview of all your records. It gives you access to custom dashboards and ability to add new records. So I touched on that a few minutes ago. Let me go back. This lets me access a form. There's actually two things, and it's actually helpful to go and open a project with multiple. So here's an adaptation of one of the projects we use for the dog aging project that I used, that you'll notice has 6 forms here, just to make it a little more richer, so I could show you things where you might have a typical project which has a bunch of data and a bunch of different forms, or I use the term form or instrument interchangeably. So what I wanted to show is how you navigate in the record status dashboard, and that is you can click on the subject ID or record ID here, and it will show you, it'll basically zoom into that record, subject 6. I'm going to make this a little bigger, subject 6, and then I can open any of the forms for that subject, such as the initial, and look at the data in there and modify it or whatnot. I can also, if it's a brand new record, these would be empty circles. They wouldn't have a color, and I could start by taking that particular instrument and adding data to it. Here's also where I can do record level actions like deleting the record, for example. Going back to the dashboard, I can also go directly to a particular instrument in a particular record by clicking on its little bubble button as well. And oh, the one other thing I mentioned is you can add a new record via here, and you see these are all blank now. And because the auto number feature is turned on, it automatically increments the number for me. I'm not going to do anything with that record though. Back out of it. And then finally, I want to mention this dashboard is kind of fixed. It gives you all instruments for all subjects, but I can do this thing, create a custom dashboard where I can actually create a filter using filter logic, which I'm not going to go into at this time. And I can actually subset and say, I only want to look at a select set of instruments. And then I can name this dashboard, and I can switch between the default dashboard, which gives me everything, and I can focus in on one thing, like if I only wanted to look at females or people who hadn't consented yet, or people who were post-consent or post-randomization. I can make all those changes and have subsets in different dashboards. Were there any questions? All right. Add edit records I talked about already. I can add a new record. I can select from the dropdown all the existing records by the subject ID or study or record ID, or I can choose a field to search on and search within there. I'm just going to skip it since I already did that. So again, this is a good break to ask you if you have any questions. Something in the chat. Could you repeat who has access to this program? If I am a graduate? Matt, I'll let you take that answer.
Sure. I think you got a slide that's maybe coming up that will get into a little bit of details on this. But because of, as Paul mentioned a second ago, because of the way that REDCap is run on different servers, depending on who's running them, you kind of have to decide where you want to put your project. And that may be a different choice if you're just starting out learning like we'll be doing today, versus if you're actually conducting research for your first project, or if you're setting up something like Paul mentioned, this dog aging project that will have to live on for 6, 10 years. You may choose to work with an organization that, can set up their own instance to run it. As it stands right now, today we'll be using a trial account at Vanderbilt, right? The REDCap project itself runs
Right.
an instance that we'll be able to use a trial account just to play with. And the reason for that is we don't have to get access on any given system at the UW right now. What we'll say in a second, I'll just say it right now though, is we recommend for most folks at the University of Washington using the ITHS REDCap instance, the Institutional Translational Health Services, is probably your best starting place because anyone at the university can get an account set up there and can get up and running no problem. We
And
do also,
here's the
okay, thank
URL
you.
for that. I'll just type while we're in there. Go ahead.
So this would probably be for most general purpose users, your starting spot. If you are working at CSDE and conducting research here, like you're a graduate, you have a fellowship through CSDE, or you're working with an affiliate that's running their grant through CSDE, like we offer computing support at CSD, that's exceptional. If you haven't used any of those services, check them out. We also host our own REDCap instance for projects that require kind of a higher level of service. And so if that might apply to you over time, if you're conducting a research study, you can just reach out to myself or Paul if that's something that you're finding the ITHS instance doesn't allow you enough customizability or the features you want. We can also work at CSDE to do something a little bit more specialized or customized.
Right. And I'll just add, if you are a student, you can get an account at the ITHS instance. It's and you log in based on your net ID.
Okay, and I see one other question, BT, and for external research affiliates. So that's a good question. It kind of depends on where you are at, right? Because if you're at a different institution, it's very likely that your institution will have its own REDCap instance, and that would probably be the best place to start. If you are working collaboratively with someone at CSDE on a big project that runs through here, we can talk more about the hosting of that here. But I believe the ITHS instance is reserved for University of Washington students, staff, and faculty. Is that true, Paul?
Actually, no, they do allow other institutions. They have to use it if they have some sort of relationship with UW, with the University of Washington.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, but if not, feel free just to keep chatting or turn on your
And if you
microphone.
want,
You can ask.
yep. And if you want to go to the ITHS instance, you just go to redcap.iths.org, and they have a little link in there to say creating a new account and whatnot, and you can follow that if you're interested. But we won't need to do that for this particular class. Okay, we're
Thanks.
going to continue. So the first thing to talk about, and we will talk about logging in later in a few minutes for the first lab, is what is a REDCap project? A project's a self-contained container for all related data collected for a research study or other usage. Because, and I say other usage, like for example, we could create a REDCap project to manage all the students who attend this class. It's sort of an ancillary thing. It's not particularly for research, but it is sort of an operational use of REDCap to help us manage metadata about the class. But it's one, it's an idea of one particular thing. For the dog aging project, which is a study which has been going on for 6+ years, we have probably 20 different projects because we do different things within. So a research project itself might have multiple projects, but a lot of research projects will have one REDCap project that to collect all data for that particular study. It really revolves around to what consists of a record. What is a record supposed to represent when you are designing this? If a record is a study participant or a dog or the enrollment in a class. That will gauge whether you need multiple projects or one project to get the work done. A lot of people call a REDCap project a database all the time. I don't particularly, but I know a lot of people call it a database. And in a sense, it is sort of a database, but it's really stored behind the scenes within a big database for all of the projects in at a REDCap instance. So that would be at CSDE are stored in this one MySQL database behind the scenes, or actually it's MariaDB because REDCap works with either MySQL or MariaDB. We will, so someone asked about data dictionary. We'll have a whole section where we'll talk about data dictionary later. All projects are independent of other projects, meaning there's kind of like a firewall. If you create your project to study Alzheimer's disease, and we have our project studying bacteria infections, no data is shared across those projects. There's a firewall between the and the users can overlap. They can have one user's access to both projects, but it's all managed separately. You could see all your projects that you have access to at the My Projects page. That was this page right there. So that brings us to this lab. This lab is very simple. First of all, you're going to do create an account at the Vanderbilt REDCap server. Now, if you already have, I'll just say one thing, and I'll open the lab. I have it right here. If you happen to have access to another a REDCap instance already, you have an account. You could create the project there if you'd like. But for simplicity, we're asking everyone to use, unless you have a good reason, to just do it on the Vanderbilt server. And this will walk you through the steps to do that. And then you'll create your first project. That's it. We'll give you 15 minutes to work on it. Actually 10 minutes because you really don't need that much time. So we'll come back at 10:47. While you're working on it, use the chat window to engage with us and ask us any questions. Or you could even speak up or put up your hand. Okay. If anyone doesn't know where to get the modules, Matt just posted the link to that PDF. I'll make sure this link still works. Yeah, then you also have, from that link, you have to click right here to get a 1-week REDCap trial account. Okay. I'll just add that it's really important you do the labs because the labs build on each other. So if you don't do lab one, you won't be able to do any of the other labs. And if you have trouble, just reach out to us via the chat window.
While we have a second, for those folks that have finished or can kind of listen and multitask, I also wanted to add, along with offering these workshops at CSD, one of the reasons we kind of exist and how we work on the campus, for our external affiliates, for our faculty affiliates, and for graduate students that are conducting research. One of our missions is just to facilitate and accelerate research and any space that's kind of generally broadly related to population research or demography. And so in the case of like REDCap in this workshop, we offer this to give you just a broad overview of what's possible with REDCap, assuming that you'll probably get to the end of this workshop and each and every one of the 9 or 10 of you all have different goals and objectives and what you would be using this for. And the idea is you'll probably get to the end of this workshop, and for some of you, this will be enough to get you started administering your first survey. But for other folks, you may have more kind of grand visions of how you'd like to use REDCap and thinking through how to implement that and build that, whether that be for an existing research study or a grant you're writing. Those are also the types of things that CSDE, myself, and Paul can be helpful for. If you've got some ideas and want to talk through them, feel free. This workshop is just supposed to be a starting point. We don't expect you by the end of this to be able to build a 50,000 study, participant study on aging in dogs, for example. Reach out to us and ask lots of questions. That's what we're here for.
We have about 4 minutes left for this lab. BT, did you have a question?
Oh no, I was just appreciating the
Okay,
disclaimer.
thank you.
Yeah.
Um, Paul, where is the send request, or Jose, where is the send request once you create a new project?
Perhaps I did it wrong, but I thought to go to create a new REDCap project and put the title of the project, project purpose, project notes, empty project, and then in the bottom says send request. Maybe I'm in the wrong place. I bet I am.
Okay, let's clarify.
It should
So,
say create project is really
it,
what you need to do.
Jose, are you working at ITHS's REDCap instance or the one at Vanderbilt?
It says, on the top says redcap.iths.org.
Yeah, that was,
Maybe I'm in the
no,
wrong place.
we asked, if you look at the lab in the beginning, to use the Vanderbilt instance, not the ITHS.
Is
We were
that
just
the
letting
link
you know.
that says,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
The
Then I
problem
will,
with doing it ITHS is that your project has to be approved, and so you won't be able to have it approved for the use of the class in this class because there's a delay. So you don't want to do that. You want to create the project at Vanderbilt, the login and the project at Vanderbilt. So you can go ahead and try to do that now, or do that while I start talking. It's not that difficult. Thank you for asking, and Matt for suggesting that. What's send request? So we got about another minute before we restart. And I'm going to try to be really prompt on things just because there's a lot of information to cover. So if you need time to catch up, feel free to do some of these things while we continue. Okay, we're gonna restart. I'll apologize too that I may have sort of led people down the wrong path by putting in the chat the URL for the ITHS instance. That was just post class, not actually for this class, if you were interested in that, because the account you're creating at Vanderbilt is only useful for demo purposes. It will go away after a week. But if you were to do that lab, you would go here, you would register with your info, and when this is done, then you'd have to go to your email and click on it. That would finalize creating the account. And then once you do that, you just click on create new on the new project link, and that should get you a new project. So that's what you were supposed to do. And this is the slide that essentially Matt and I talked about already. If you're working with CSDE, that is, you're doing some studies in demography or ecology or something related, and you have an affiliation with us, then you would email CSDE help at _help@uw.edu to get an account created at CSDE. If you are at another institution, then talk to that other institution REDCap group, or at UW, and you don't know where to go, I would suggest going to ITHS, and that again is redcap.iths.org. Any lingering questions for the lab or anything else? Okay, we will continue. So this is a key section, so you try to pay attention because everything sort of revolves. Once you've created the project, which is essentially an empty container for everything else you're going to do, the key item that you will work with is an instrument, also called a form or sometimes called a survey. But a survey is really a special type of instrument. So I don't use that term, although a lot of people use it interchangeably. So what is a REDCap instrument? Recall that a project is a container for all the data we're going to collect. And a project is essentially a database, but an instrument is a way to collect a set of related data. And you could think of an instrument as a table if you were doing this in Excel. You might have one Excel tab or sheet or a certain amount, a certain collection of data. A project may have many instruments. When we looked at that dog project earlier, which I don't know if I still have it open, I can get rid of that. This one had 6 different instruments. So you might have demographics, medical history, current medications, outcomes, etc. To create an instrument, there's 2 ways to create an instrument. You can use the designer or the data dictionary. We're going to start with the designer, and then we'll talk about the data dictionary approach. So to get to the designer, you either go to the nav bar directly in the project home and design section and click on designer, or you click on project setup, go in there, and from there, click on the designer. Once you get there, you'll see a screen that looks like this. So let's get out of that. Go back to my projects. I'm going to create a new project myself. Now I'm doing this on the CSDE instance, but if I was doing it on the Vanderbilt instance, the user interface would be pretty similar. Just give me a name. For the purpose, if I choose anything but practice, then I have to fill out a bunch of other text boxes to tell REDCap more about my project, but this is just really for practice. So I'm going to say add that. I'm going to add this to my training folder because I've already created these folders. You wouldn't see that if you hadn't created folders in advance. And I'll just say, create the project. Okay, so now I have this empty container. And then again, I can go here or here from the project setup to get to the designer. And this is the screen I'm going to see. I'm going to widen it a little so you can see it better. And I didn't ask, but does everyone think this zoom level is pretty good? If you don't, put a message in the chat to tell us that you'd like it zoomed in more. Okay, so you start and they pre-name a form called Form 1. And within Form 1, there is a single field called Record ID with the label Record ID. So the thing to realize is, A, your form doesn't have to be called Form 1, but if you go over here, you can rename it to demographics, for example. Click Save, and now your form is for demographics. And then B, if I don't, this field cannot be deleted. You know, just like this first form can't be deleted. The first field called Record ID, because this is your primary key for the entire project. You can rename it though by clicking on the pencil icon. If you don't like Record ID, you prefer Study ID, you just do that. Name that, save it, and it is Record ID. So this has to be a text box, which is we'll talk about types in a second, text box. And it has to be the first field, which cannot be deleted. But I can add new fields after that. So let's say I wanted a field to collect first name. Then I have to give it a name, a variable name. The REDCap user interface kind of uses the word field and variable interchangeably. And I'm going to call it first name. And I'm going to click save. I'm going to ignore these other things for now. Well, I don't need to validate it because it's just going to be text. I don't need to use this. Actually, I will not ignore these other things. I'll mention what they are. Required. Should the person who's coming here and completing this form be required to enter this? Generally, some identifying information you probably want required. And in some cases, you might make every field required. That's up to you to decide. Also, do I want to tag it as an identifier? Like, this is important if you're exporting your data and you want to de-identify it. REDCap will automatically strip out, if you ask it to, the identifier. So this is, name is an identifier, right? Name, address, phone number, email address, those will all be identifiers. So I would tend to want those tagged. If you tag them now, you won't have to go back and tag them later. So if you do it as you're going, good idea. And then you can play with custom alignment, field note, action tags. We'll ignore those for now. So now I have
quick
one
question.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the field first name? So with the variable name, do you recommend using like not having spaces for
You can't
programming?
you can have spaces.
You
If you-
can have spaces.
Correct. And
Okay.
I should have said this. Variable names can't use uppercase characters, can't use special characters except the underscore. That is it. So that's why I specifically put first underscore name. Can't even use a hyphen. So if you try it, by the way, I'll show you with another field, and I type you'll see when you save it, it actually renames it for you.
Oh,
It took and replaced the hyphen with an underscore. And if I put spaces, it would have done the same thing, and it lowercase everything on, yeah.
okay. And with the identifier tag, does that one, if you select yes, is that when it removes
Nope.
identifiable information?
Well, there's nothing
Or-
to remove. It's only when you're exporting the data.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Right. And I haven't collected any data. I'm just still designing, so there's nothing to remove. So I'll add a second field, last name.
Yeah, just
Now,
clarifying on the identifier, it's just a great way, depending on the size of your study, who all is going to be interacting with the data. to tag those variables that you may not want to release to the general public or to all of your scientists, but you still need to collect them for administrative purposes. Whoever's starting the instrument creation process will kind of know those in advance, and it's a safeguard to put up before the project grows too large.
So in the long term, if we select identifier yes, then it makes it easier so that if we do get that information, then that's not shared information then, correct?
Right, like Paul
Well,
just said, when you go to export, there's an option to say exclude identifiers, and then it will
Cool.
wholesale not include those. So you've already gotten that decision-making process done. You don't have to do it variable by variable each time. Is that right, Paul?
yeah, and I want to mention this is a totally a way to tag them. It doesn't do anything in and of itself. Only optionally, you can set it to strip that out later.
Perfect. I
And
just
it makes
wanted to make
sense when
sure
I
like
do
it made.
yeah, no, it won't do anything. And just think of it, when I do statistical analysis, I don't need names. But when I'm interacting with my study subjects, I need to know their name. It's really sort of post data collection. It's a mechanism. You could still, even if you don't use this, you can still choose to not export that field, by the way. It's just a nice to have thing. The other thing I'll mention is you can come back and fix it later also. You'll also notice something I didn't mention is the label is a nice name with spaces, and it can be multiple lines, can be anything. So this is the thing that the user entering data will see, the label. Behind the scenes though, the way that your fields are accessed or would be the variable name. And the variable name has to be unique across the whole project, whereas the field label could be repeated, it could be anything you want. Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just one point. We had another question from Nada that was talking about the, could you just quickly explain the validation options? Because I think that's a really important concept behind all the variables.
Yeah, I'm going to get to a slide on that in a minute.
All right, you're brilliant.
I was just trying
What's coming?
to start by adding a couple just to get your feet wet. Okay, so here we go. Your first instrument is named Form 1. I mentioned you can rename it. Then I mentioned that your first field is called Record ID in Form 1. That can be renamed also, but neither the form or the field can be deleted. Don't try. Once you've added, messed with or renamed, or possibly or not, record ID is certainly fine. In most of my projects, we usually rename it to something like study ID, but that's totally optional. Then we can add a field, and we click on the add field button. After I did that for 2 fields, when we click the add field, it brings up the add new field dialog, and the first thing you'll choose will be the field type. And let's go back and talk about that. The field type can be any of these field types. So the first one is text box. That's for basically free form entry. But the free form entry can be validated, and we'll talk about the validation in a second. Notes box, I'll show you what that looks like. It's helpful to sort of, and these aren't the best variable names. I don't recommend using what I'm doing right now, but I'm just giving you an idea. That's what a notes box is going to look like. So people can enter sentences, multiple lines, potentially. A calculated field we'll skip over for now. A multi-choice, we have 2 single answer multi-choices and 1 multiple answer. You can have a drop-down list. Everyone is familiar with a drop-down. We could have sex as a drop-down. and I can use capitalization here, by the way, in my choices if I'd like. That's optional. It's only the variable name that has to be lowercase or use an underscore. And that's what a drop-down is going to look like. I put that there, but there's another field to use when you have a small number of choices that is a little easier for the user. It's called radio buttons. If I have less than, say, 10 choices, I tend to favor a radio button over a drop down, but they actually do exactly the same thing. They just elicit a single choice from a list of choices that you get to design. So if I said favorite color, I have 1 red, 2 blue, 3 green. That gets totally real. And so why do I say this is easier? Because all I have to do is click in one place versus click once to drop it down and then click a second time to access it. This is better when you have a lot of choices. This is better when you have less choices. And here's a place where using this alignment, you can choose vertical or horizontal. And I'll show what that looks like. Now I've laid them out horizontally, so it gives you a little slight better compactness when you have a small number of choices. A few other ones I'll mention: checkboxes. So checkboxes are thinking of what would be a good checkbox. Oh, good. If we're asking someone, and actually one of the in a transportation project, which you'll do in the next lab, you're asked how people commute. So they might say by walking, to busing or the bus, 3 bicycle, 4 car, 5 train. This is an idea. Well, it turns out, and this can be oriented that way, or like say going down, that's up to you. When someone is, and I'm not entering data, I'm just trying this out right now. Someone can have more than one choice, right? They can, I mean, I used to, when I worked my last job at Fred Hutch, I would bus and then I would walk about a mile. So I would choose both, right? If I took the train today, I would also walk, and maybe I'd bicycle to the train or take a bus to the train, because the Sound Transit, for example, to get there is about a couple miles from my house. So I would take the bus entry. So that's a choice where someone can answer multiple choices. Here, I can only do one. If I click on red now that I've clicked blue, it will unclick that. So those are really important distinctions to be made. Checkbox is the only field that allows you to provide multiple answers, and it essentially gets converted into multiple questions at export time. Yes, no, and true, false are really just radio buttons that are pre-configured to have those choices. When you look at a yes, no field, you see it will be a radio button right there. I forgot to put a label, which is not a smart thing. I'll just put a placeholder for this, so I can't think of anything fast enough. There are some other things. The signature field, file upload field lets people say submit a resume, and it gets uploaded, and then it can be downloaded later. Slider, visual scale, descriptive text. Descriptive text can be useful for messaging to the person entering the data, letting them know that they did an invalid combination of fields, or they're almost at the end of the survey, whatever. And then begin new section lets you segment your sections. So let's say this intro section was information about the person. Gives me a little heading there, and then about the commuting stuff. It allows you to separate out different parts. Okay, let's get back to talking about validation. So I want someone to add a really common thing is what is a certain date, like birth date, date of birth. Here, I would choose one of these field types that is used to enter dates. The normal way we do this in the United States is MDY, but you can use DMY or YMD. And then that will set that. I can also enter a minimum or a maximum. For example, for a birth date, I don't want someone entering a future date, so I could say the maximum using a special word called today, and I could say the maximum limit is today, so they can't enter a future date. That would also be true for like appointments and things that we knew happened in the past. And so that adds a little smarts to the field. It also adds this little calendar, and it has this little button that lets me copy in today's date. So that's one way to validate. Another way, another validation is like if I know it's a number, then I can say integer. If it's a whole number, if it's a number with decimal points, I could say number. Other really important ones are email that will validate it and make sure it is a valid email with a valid domain. Or as far as it knows, I mean, there could be, it looks at some rules of how it looks. It has to have something, an at, and a domain that comes after that with a dot in it. Phone number in North America, time, zip code, those are useful validation. Now, if you use an integer or number, you can, and the date fields, you can also provide a minimum and a maximum. And there's, like I said, for the dates, you can use the word today. For a time, you can use the word now to help you working with the minimum and maximum. I'll add one other thing you can do is, I'll leave this as none, is use this ontology service. If you are collecting standardized data, like has anyone heard of the ICD-9 codes or the ICD-10 codes? These are codes for categorizing disease. I can connect to the BioPortal ontology service and, oh, this hasn't been set up. So we need to set that up on our server because no one has ever asked for that before on this instance, Matt. But if I was using one where this was set up already, then I could actually choose various standardized collection things like the ICD-10s, codes, other disease codes, and diagnoses and various things that are stored at this BioPortal ontology service in California. Whoever asked about validation, did that answer you? Oh, nada. Did I answer your question? I'll assume so, because I haven't heard back, or you're trying to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. All right. So there's other field type I didn't mention yet. It's called a matrix field. So if you look at my dog project and you look at one of the instruments called Canine Social and Learned Behavior instrument, we use the matrix type. So what is the point of the matrix? The matrix is like a radio button, or actually can be used with checkboxes, but they're laid out in a very compact manner for re-ask. So basically where the answer key is the same across multiple fields. And so it lets you ask those in a grid so that it looks like at data collection time, like that. And I can go down and answer these as I go. It's kind of nice when people are going to answer, you're going to ask a lot of questions. It's also really good for psychological scores where they ask people, you know, are you depressed? Are you this? Are you that? And without the answers having to be labeled for everyone independently, it gives you this nice grid. And the way you do that, going back to our workshop. Also notice you can add a field in the middle. Like I didn't have to add it at the end. I can go right here. And here's where I say add matrix of fields. And there I have to provide the header. Um, uh, and then I provide each row will be another question. But this isn't the best questions. Let's say, how are you? And then I provide, I agree, or let's see, what's this? Don't agree, neutral, that sort of thing. And obviously you can do different things. This can be either radio buttons or check boxes. I have to provide a general matrix name. And then something like, I am feeling sad. I am feeling happy. You get the idea. I am feeling angry. So that kind of thing. You can also choose if they're required. And then that puts a grid that looks kind of like that. Okay. Questions before we switch to talk about the data dictionary? Okay. And like I said, we covered most fields, but we didn't talk about every type. We can't possibly get through everything in this class, so I just something to think about. Okay, this project I didn't add any data, but if I was to add data, I would go ahead, edit record. Then I could do there. Then it would opens the first form. This is the only form, and then I can type my name. Most of these fields are not going to make any sense because I did it in a mishmash way. I didn't include any way to say, I don't commute. I walk down the stairs or up the stairs. And obviously I wasn't born today, but I'm going to use that. When I'm entering this, the other thing I didn't mention is you can choose to say something's complete, incomplete, or unverified. These are actually totally in your mind what you want these to mean. No, most people say incomplete means I have to come back and fix that. It's not a complete setting. Unverified, you might use if you want someone else to look over maybe your entries as a way to designate that. And complete means I'm done. This is a complete entry, and it gets that green box. You asked what's matrix group name? It just makes the whole matrix group unique, so it has to have a unique name, the entire group. That REDCap uses to keep it straight. Other than that, it really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't get exported, the matrix name. It just, for whatever housekeeping reason, they require that. So a lot of people will just put like matrix 1, matrix 2. I think it's best always not do it that way, is to give a descriptive name if you can. Let's talk for a second before we go to data dictionary about names. If you're going to be doing a study, use this for research, and you feel like you'll likely have multiple instruments, I suggest using like a 3-character prefix for the field that tells you what instrument it came from. Like if it's going to be dem a demography, I might say dem _ first name. This is good because you sometimes collect similar data on multiple forms, especially if it's a longitudinal study where you collect stuff over multiple time period. So I would tend to give everything this prefix, and you'll be thankful later when you do this, because it makes then you enforce the fact that everything has to sort of be descriptive, but also tells you what instrument that was collected in, especially if you ask the same or a similar question over several instruments. Because when you export the data later to your stat package, for example, it will not include which instrument it came from. It will only include a record with all of the fields. So I definitely suggest that sort of approach, but you don't have to. A lot of people don't do it that way. So, and of course, a field name named yes, no, or question 1 or question 2 is also very much not suggested. Make it brief but descriptive of the variable you're collecting. And I like to suggest a prefix, but that's up to you whether you use a prefix. Okay. Let's talk about any questions about that or comments? Let's talk about the data dictionary. So I went ahead and created a form, and through the interactive online designer, but I can at any time also download the data dictionary, and the user interface for this changed slightly just in the last recent version. So the slides, if they have a copy of what this looks like, I don't remember. It doesn't. The user interface to download that looks slightly different. So just warn you. So now I'm going to download this data dictionary. It'll get pre-labeled, but I can change the name. I don't want it in documents. I want this there in downloads. Okay. Okay, it's going to get downloaded. It depends on your browser, where it puts the download, if it lets you decide where you want it or not. So, but I can go in Windows, I can go to this little thing and open the recent downloads, and I'm going to do that. I need to switch the window now though, so turn that off and switch to Excel, because in Windows, if you double click or you open it up that way, it's going to download it to the CSV format, which stands for comma separated values. It's going to open up with Excel if you have Excel installed on your machine. If you don't have Excel installed, then I don't know exactly what it would open it up in. So am I showing? Yes, I am showing. Okay, here it is. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to expand all of the fields so you can see them by doing that. So the first field or column, I mean, is going to be variable / field name. So even there, it didn't decide what to call it. Was it a variable or a field? It just said it could be variable / field. And these are all the study IDs I use. So I'm going to boost the font here. Then the form name, we only have one form, but if we had multiple forms, it would have the form name. You'll notice that the form name, the internal form name, is actually lowercase. So if you remember, I called it demographics with a capital thing. Well, the internal name, it gets rid of case. So it's going to look like that. Section headers are in this special column, section heads, but then here's the field type: text for text box, radio for radio button, drop down for drop down, checkbox for checkbox, yes, no, notes field label, that's the nice name that the user entering data will see. The field name, though, is the behind the scenes name. The choices, if it is a multiple choice type question, such as radio, dropdown, or checkbox, I need to provide the choices, and the way they are represented in the data dictionary are number, comma, text label, and then this pipe character or up down line, and then the next with spaces in there. If I had field notes, these are just little notes that will show up at the bottom of the field label, smaller font. Actually the bottom of the entry, the place where you enter the data, the radio button or the text box. That's a little extra note you can add. And then if there's any validation, like we made this a date of month, day, year format, then that will appear there. There's a few other things, the validation, min and max, is something an identifier, is it required? By default, everything is right vertical, but if you change it to right horizontal or one of the other things, there's a left horizontal, left vertical, which changes the look slightly. It'll be in a custom alignment. And then if it's a matrix group, all of the entries in the matrix will get the matrix group name and a few other things that I won't go into here. We will eventually talk about branching logic. If branching logic is entered, that would appear in here as well. The cool thing now is that I can modify these things. If I wanted to modify this to say date of birth, or I can add new fields. Address. I can make this a text box and leave it like that. Save this, quit. I'll have to reshare now. Then I come back here, choose the modified data dictionary in the same screen, the data dictionary screen. Remember, I get there from either here or from project setup right there. Then I choose the file. It's right there. Upload it. It will tell me, it's basically said, you didn't do anything really stupid. You didn't make a mistake. If you use a choice that it doesn't allow, it will tell you and it'll give me an error. But since I didn't make any errors, it'll say commit. It'll also say that the new dictionary contains 13 fields and it's going to replace the existing design, which only has 12 fields. That's because I added that one field of address. So now I go to designer and the changes I made are all now reflected in here. You can start with blank slate. And so let's say you want to just design everything using the data dictionary and you don't like the user interface. I'll mention another thing is in here. If you want, you don't know what all the fields are, you can download this thing called the data dictionary demonstration file. And that will essentially give you a template that gives you all of the columns and then some fake data. You would basically delete the fake data or the examples, I guess they are, and then start entering your data dictionary in there. I'll skip this because I'm not going to switch to that. Questions? I think there was a question in the chat about data dictionary.
Yeah, I've been handling them. It was just trying to look at the data dictionary so far as blank in our project because there's no instrument yet.
Correct.
Yeah.
If you've never entered anything, it'll have, so what you do want to do though is do what I just suggested. Click on this link here, data dictionary demonstration file, and you can start with that. Then once you looked over the examples, then remove the examples and put in the fields, and you can do that. All right. Are there any other questions, or we're all good to go? And we are going to talk about another important thing called branching logic. So branching logic lets you focus your fields so that they're most appropriate. If, for example, if someone said they don't watch TV, you don't need to ask them what TV shows do they watch, right? So let's look at how we do that. Let's go back to our thing in here. So let's say we are going to create a secondary question. Let's get rid of this one because it's really stupid. That if they enter bus, we're going to ask them which bus line do they take. So we'll add that right after commuting type. And it's going to be free-form text. I mean, we could put specific entries. Actually, let's do that. Let's make it a drop down and say the buses that go by the U are, say, the 43, the 48, I don't know, the 73. First of all, this would be better. By the way, the value I use could also be the value I show, the label I show. In this case, it might make sense. I'm just gonna leave it at that, do some small number of choices. Okay, so now we'll look at this. We'll go ahead before we do anything with branching logic and enter a value here. By the way, these are the only two required fields, so I could skip these. I'm going to for now. I'm going to say I do walking. I bike to school or work, or whatever, right? And they're like, why are you asking me what bus I take? That doesn't make sense. Obviously, the date of birth and address are in a weird place. You wouldn't normally design a form like this, but we can ignore those for now. So we're honing in on this. Okay, so what's a better way to design this? Is to be to go back and use branching logic. So I only need to ask this question if they've chosen bus. So I go in here and click on edit branching logic. And there's a nice drag and drop builder. I can enter this if I know how to express the REDCap sort of expressions, and I know how to write them. And you can learn that on your own, but it's much easier to do the drag and drop logic builder. So I need to choose the question. The question was the DEM commute type, right? And if it's bus, so I actually just go and take and drag this right here. And it essentially builds the logic for me that grays out, but because I've chose this. And now this is only going to be shown if the second option if DEM commute type is selected. This is a little weird because we've made this a checkbox. If I'll show another example, if I had some silly question of why blue, and I only wanted that asked if the user entered blue, I can do this branching logic here. And this branching logic is going to look a little simpler because there's only one choice allowed. So I go to favorite color and I choose this. In this case, you'll notice if I looked at the advanced, it's going to be DEM fav color equals 2. But checkboxes are a little different since you can have multiple choices. So the way it was expressed for checkboxes was different. And it will convert this for you but I find most of the time I use the drag and drop because it's easier. So now looking at entering a record here, now when I enter red, notice I don't see why is it blue, why did you choose blue or green, but when I choose blue, bingo. And then if I'm doing walking or bicycling or whatnot, but if I add bus, then I get elicited which bus line do I take. That's how branching logic works. The nice thing too is you can use branching logic with this one field type that we haven't looked at an example of yet. For example, I could add a descriptive field here and say, this is a descriptive text, which is not a data bearing field. What I mean by that is it will not be exported. It's really for only help in gathering data. So, and the cool thing is I can use this thing called the rich text editor, and I can boost the font if I want. I can do a background of, green, and I could change the foreground color or whatever. But I can make it italics and do other cool stuff. And now go in and add branching logic to the same branching logic as if they took the bus. And now when we are doing this, and we have an entry here, you'll see it's showing because I had bus selected, but if I don't have it, and notice it's clearing it. But so if I undo something, sometimes it will tell you it's clearing the entry. It cleared the not for descriptive messages, but because I had entered the 48 bus, it was telling me I was clearing it because it's no longer showing it. It needs to clear it if you actually have a data field that is hidden or shown. So that's how branching logic works. Any questions about branching logic? Okay, I am going to go back and talk about some other features. We looked at validation. I'm not going to look at calculations because we don't have enough time, but you can gather calculations, let you make numerical calculations based on other numerical fields. You can also do something called piping data so that like you can pipe the person's name into a field label of another field or another variable. And you just have to use the expression. The basic expression is to put in square brackets the field name if you want to do that. Let me show that quickly and then we'll move on. So let's say I want this label to use the first name. This is what's called piping. So I basically just go in here and say, I need to know what the field name is. And I can do that by just scrolling up and looking at it. Did I get it right? Yes. Another way to, if you have a large project, what I like to do is I like to right click on this thing called Codebook, open it in a new tab, and have that up at the same time. And then this has a list of all the field names, their labels, their options. And so I could have gone in here and just taken and cut and pasted that field name. That's what the codebook. The codebook is sort of an on-screen version of the data dictionary that is actually nicer, sort of meant more for reading, where the data dictionary is meant more for actually nailing every option, putting every option into that spreadsheet. So it's much less friendly than the code book, where the code book is friendly. And you could take the code book and basically print it to a PDF and have a PDF version of the code book if you'd like, handy while you're working. So now that I added that, assuming I got the name right, now when I go in here, notice it will say, thank you for taking the bus to school, Mary. So that's called piping. It doesn't change the collection of the data, it just makes the whole thing a little nicer, more customized. You can also use action tags to set a default value or hide fields or sort of retire old fields or choices that you no longer use. There's this thing called action tags. Let me show you how you access it, but I'm not going to spend really any time on it, except to sort of basically just sort of, let's say, I wanted, where's a good place? I wanted to default my favorite color. I could, the way you use the action tags is you can click on here, that opens up the box. But if you click on this red thing called action tag, it will actually walk you through them. For some reason, I no longer want to ask this question. Once I've gone into production, you can't delete fields once you've gone into production mode, but I can hide them. So I could use the add hidden. If I wanted to retire a specific choice, I could say, oops. So I would undo the hidden, which I'll do in a minute. But I could use this one called hide choice. And hide choice basically, so I can, when you want to edit it, opens this thing. It's a little confusing. So I just need to know, let's say I don't want green to be shown anymore, then I'd say that. I have to put quotes around it. Hide choice is that. Now, the nice thing about hide choice is anytime someone had already entered data, it won't wipe out their thing, but it will disallow it for new entries. So if I add a new record, you'll notice that the green no longer shows. But if I had an existing record where green was selected, it would show up. That works for drop downs and radio buttons and checkboxes. So those are some of them, but there's a lot of different, as you saw when I was looking at this, there's a lot of action tags, and I can't possibly go through them all, but you can set default values if you had a minimum age or a usual, if you expected everyone to live in the Washington state, you could default it so Washington was pre-selected for the list of states. Excuse me.
Paul, who
Yes.
I often run with, I'm going to be your pacer today. Pretend like we're on a run. We need to move things along here. I'm just looking at the clock to make sure we get our labs in.
Yep.
But I think it's really important for everybody to understand with these combinations of like the validation, the action tags, the calculations that you can do. REDCap kind of provides a multi-purpose, almost infinite toolkit of ways to design and check the data collection process throughout. So if you can dream something up, it's generally possible. How to do it, that can be a lot more complicated, and Paul's shown a lot of the tools, but again, please feel free if you're kind of wrestling with something, reach out and ask. Paul's probably done it at some point in time in his career if you can dream it up and want to try and figure out how to do it with an instrument.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks
Yep.
for trying to keep us on schedule. Yeah, we are a little behind schedule. Okay, because we need to create this instrument, and it's already 11:40, and we end at 12. So we may end up moving the last lab, which I think we're going to do to next week. So go ahead and create this, do the lab 2, and we will give you, you'll probably need 15 minutes. So you're going to need to like 11:55, and then we'll sum up in 5 minutes. Thanks, Matt. Sorry for getting behind. Just mentioned that really important if you can stay till noon to have a chance for me to add a few things at 11:55. So try to stay here the full time if you can. And I will be assigning lab 3 as an exercise to do after class or between classes. And
I
do
have a quick
post any
question.
questions. Yeah.
When I started making the new instrument, it didn't give me the record number immediately. Is that like,
I don't know what you mean exactly.
sorry, let me exit out what I'm doing real quick.
Is it the first form?
It's the second form.
Yeah, the second form doesn't repeat the record identifier. It's only in
Oh,
the first
okay.
form.
Okay, great.
All the data will
Thank
be on one record though,
Okay,
when you
cool.
go to report on it or export it.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And if that's the case and you want to keep your first form, just ignore that step with the record identifier. We have 8 minutes left for this exercise. Let us also mention if you're short on time, you can reduce the number of choices in some of the questions or leave a few questions or variables out. Would be good to try out the branching logic if you can at the end.
Add records is just on the left column again, under the data collection section, add edit. Okay.
Or you can do it from the record status dashboard. There's a little add new record here. So either way, or this. You get restarted in 1 minute. Okay, it's 11:55. This is what the form should look like after you're done. Hopefully you had enough time to do that. If not, I would suggest you do it after this class. So here's one exercise I want you to do. Here's the funny thing. We're using these Vanderbilt trial accounts, but they end 1 week from when you created, which will mean they'll end right at the beginning of the class for next week. It actually goes by the hour, unfortunately. So I want you to download your data dictionary today, right now, by going, I'm going to show you how to do it. You're going to go to the data dictionary for either there or right here. You're simply going to download it. Make sure you know where it's going. Mine's going to the downloads the downloads folder. And then I suggest either emailing it to yourself, or if you have a USB key or some way to save it off, should be able to get on either Gmail or your UW email system from your computer and email it to yourself. Or just I'm sorry. I was remembering us doing this in the lab. You are already on your own machine, so you don't need to do any of that. Just save it to your downloads directory or your desktop, wherever you like, and store it away so that next week you can reuse it. Does that make sense? Okay. Don't need to email it to yourself. You already have it. The next section, I'm just going to give you the really quick version, creating reports and exporting data. You can create reports. You go into data, exports, reports, and stats under applications, create new report, and quick create a report. I'll show you creating one very quickly here from the transportation. By the way, if you don't have any data, the report's not going to look very interesting. It's going to have 0 data. So I just happen to have data here. So I'm going to go here, create new report here or here, doesn't really matter. I'm going to say transportation report. I'm going to not worry about who has access right now, but if you were working in a secure system which is normal in users, then you could select which users have access to the report. I'm going to use the quick add option, which is really handy for just going through and saying, I want all these fields. Or I could click select all. There's other shortcuts, but that's what I like to use there. If I wanted to filter the report and say only where whatever the commute options included this or that, then I could, in this particular report, I don't need to use any filter. but this is how you do it. You can go and say, where commute equals that car was driven, a car that I drove, and then you can connect this by saying or, and I could say or they chose a car driven by family or friends, and then this report could be for cars, and then I would only see, and then I could choose to order the results, or study ID is fine. Study ID is fine in this case, and now it will show me all records only where someone had chosen one of the two car fields, for example. And I can scroll to the right to look at the other things. I can take and export this now by clicking export. Generally, I want to choose the first option, which is the CSV for raw data, so it doesn't include the labels. Quickly show what that looks like. Save that. And I'll actually do it with the labels version also. And you could also go directly into a statistical software package as another option. So now we'll have two options. I have to click this button again to actually do that once. Do that. So if I look at the raw version, I'm going to have to stop quickly so I can show Excel here. This is my data. Remember, we did a data dictionary earlier, which was the design, but this is the actual data that was collected now. That is the name of the fields are up there, and the values are the numeric values. But if I wanted to look at the labels version, I would see something slightly different. Let me open Excel again. Where is it? There it is. Okay. This is the labels version, which both the labels across the top are the full labels, and it has a descriptive. Checkbox is kind of boring. It either says checked or unchecked for each option. But for the other ones, it would give you the actual label. And you'll also notice that for checkboxes, it gives you a column for every possible choice, and it's either checked or unchecked. So that's what the data looks like. I would like you to try to do that report. Make sure, first of all, that you download your data dictionary today, and then do that lab 3. And then we will be caught up. Any questions? We'll skip the summary. You can read that on your own. Will you remind me if the recording is available to us? Yes, the recording will be available, right? Matt, we'll make it available.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And we'll also, I've got to run to go do camp registration for my kid here really quick. But we'll also try and make some time at the end of next week's session to do a little Q&A, because I think after take the class and kind of have some time to ruminate, Paul and I can be a good resource to talk about how you actually get your next thing done. So I'm going to drop off, but thanks.
Okay,
Paul.
Matt will drop off. I can stay also another 3 or 4 minutes if anyone has any additional questions. Otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording. Otherwise, you are free to go.